Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the SIL Legal Lounge podcast, Let's Talk Law, a show where we talk about different areas of law and policy in a frank and easy to understand manner so that everyone can end up learning something new. My name is Nida Tareen, and I am the principal of the School of International Law, a recognized teaching center for the University of London LLB Honours Program. And I will, as usual, be your host for this episode. As always, for every month's topic, we pick something which we feel is of great interest and significance to everyone who's watching. And what could be more significant than the current Iran and US war which is taking place, and Pakistan's role in all of this? So, our guest for today is someone who I consider to be an expert on the topic. And as always, I'm also very happy to report that the guest for today is an SIL alumna. So, that holds a very special place in my heart. We have with us Ms. Atiya Bakhtiar, who's joining us today. Atiya holds an LLM from the University of London, specializing in public international law with a focus on international dispute resolution. She is currently advising and working with the government of the UK and the government of Pakistan on strategies to counter serious and organized crime in Pakistan with a focus on organized criminal activities that pose severe national and international security threats to Pakistan. Apart from that, Atia also has extensive experience in international law and dispute resolution, especially in the context of humanitarian issues and conflicts. Her work includes projects with the ICRC, and she also has a lot of experience, I would say, in providing recommendations to the parliament in the implementation of human rights which have been ratified by Pakistan. Welcome, Atia. I'm so happy you could join us today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure
All
to be
right.
here.
So we obviously, since this is a topic which is, of a lot of interest to a lot of people, we managed to gather up some questions as well. Again, we always do that
Mhm.
before, we do our recording. We ask some people what they would like to ask our guest, and I do have some questions over here. There are a lot of, everybody's heard a lot of talk shows, and, there have been a lot of commentaries as well, where everybody is discussing the legal ramifications and so on. But as always, with the SIL Legal Lounge podcast, we like to break things down very simply. So let's just start at, the basic question that we have is what exactly is happening? Because Pakistan is not usually associated with such high stakes global diplomacy. So I believe this is the first time that we're seeing Pakistan take such center stage in such a conflict. They are playing the role of mediators for both United States and Iran. So how did we get here?
So it really helps to understand some of the backstory. So this war really started on the 28th of Feb, and it led to the death of Iran's supreme leader. And then Iran further responded with attacks on every Gulf state that was hosting a US military base and effectively shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. So, needless to say, neighboring Pakistan was immediately affected economically and domestically. And we saw just that the day after the strikes, clashes erupted in Karachi. At least 22 people died and
Yeah.
120 injured nationwide. And the supreme leader of Iran, the Khamenei, was a revered figure for Pakistan's Shia community, and estimated 15 to 20% of the population. So the war landed on Pakistan's streets almost immediately.
Yeah.
And against this backdrop, Pakistan's civil and military leadership moved quickly to position itself as a peacemaker rather than a bystander. Of course, there was national interest involved in that as well. And there were, I mean, structural reasons as well, like we mentioned. By some estimates, really, Pakistan has the second largest Shia Muslim population after Iran, and that gives it the cultural capital to engage with Tehran. And its leadership, both civilian and military, Pakistan's leadership, has grown closer to President Trump over the past year. So that gave it naturally that position to step up as the mediator. And so this relationship really was deliberate and recent. So in the past year, we saw that the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shehbaz Sharif, and Army Chief, Mr. Asim Munir, held multiple meetings with top Iranian leaders both in Iran and Pakistan. And then there was that White House lunch in June 2025, after which President Trump told the media that Pakistanis know Iran very well, better than most. So that public endorsement from Washington was significant. And that again gave Pakistan that position to be able to become a mediator. But Pakistan has historically played that role as well. President Nixon's unprecedented visit to China back in the 1970s when President Yahya was the president of Pakistan. And then more recently, the Doha talks between the Afghan Taliban and the US. Pakistan played a major role in that. So, really, when Pakistan stepped forward in March to become a mediator and offered that, it was conveying a message to the US and to Iran that it was utilizing a combination of its institutional access and personal relationships, historical credibility as well in some of the situations where Pakistan has stepped up previously, and of course, national interest all at once. So I think Pakistan was very well placed to become a mediator in this situation.
All right. So, on the one hand, Pakistan is playing the role of a mediator. But at the same time, I mean, there are mixed messages, wouldn't you say, that are being conveyed? So, Iran recently rejected a US peace plan that was delivered via Pakistan. And it publicly, correct me if I'm wrong, it publicly said that it is not going to negotiate with Washington. So, then how credible is Pakistan's mediation if one side isn't fully, on board, they're not fully committed?
So we have to understand that in times of wars and conflicts, it's quite normal for states to adopt a very maximalist approach, all or nothing. And Iran's rejection cannot really be construed as an outright rejection. So the sequence is what really happened was the US delivered a 15-point plan for Iran through Pakistan's mediation. And it was reported that the plan called on Iran to dismantle its nuclear sites and halt uranium enrichment and really cease support for proxies in other countries and to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Iran wasn't happy with that. And Iran called it excessive and unreasonable and really called it a wish list. But what really happened underneath really the public posturing was that on March 30th, Iran's foreign minister formally acknowledged that it has been holding indirect talks with the US through Pakistan's mediation. And Iran then responded with its counter proposals. There were 5 points that Iran proposed. Now, when a government that was saying we're not talking to anyone starts saying we're talking, but we reject their terms, the diplomatic situation on our side has materially changed. Iran is engaging. It is disputing the terms, but not really the process.
Okay, so
But
the
really, how this
mediation is
market
still going on.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Pakistan is still playing a role in indirectly conveying messages from Iran to the US and from the US to Iran. It's just not happening face to face.
Okay. All right. So yeah, because this was a point of confusion for quite a few people because some people were actually wondering, is the mediation still happening? Are we still sort of part of it, or have they completely rejected the proposal? So all right, good to know that it's still
Yeah.
carrying on. But you're right, things are
Hmm.
very different during wartime, and states have to
True.
take different stances when they're speaking to
Hmm.
the enemy, so to speak. All right, but
Yes.
let's sort of come towards Pakistan itself. So one thing which is bothering everyone, Pakistan's petrol prices. They have gone
Hmm.
up from rupees 266, I believe, to rupees now through 378. Formerly, it was a little higher, but I
Yeah.
believe there was an 80 rupees
They reduced it. Yeah.
further reduction. Yeah. So from 266 to rupees 378 per liter in 5 weeks, we've switched to a 4-day work week. Schools are now, partially online, partially on campus. How long do you think that our government can sustain this level of economic burden before domestic pressures, they sort of fall through?
Not long, to be honest. We don't really have a specific timeline for how long Pakistan can sustain this.
Yeah.
But it is being said, and the officials in our we're dealing with finance right now. They have acknowledged that these large scale subsidies and what we're calling the war austerity plan
Yeah.
cannot carry on for long. And so another reason that is being highlighted as contributing to whatever's happening is also Pakistan's frequent fuel crisis, and it's not mainly because of external shocks like currently we're having the war, there are certain weaknesses in its economic and energy policies as well. So we are very excessively dependent on imported oil. Our oil refineries do not have a very high capacity, and
Yeah.
we don't have a lot of, long-term planning. It's inadequate. So the honest assessment really is that Pakistan needs the war to end in weeks, rather than months. And every additional month of the Strait of Hormuz being closed, where, I mean, we're just having 20 ships passing right now, but that's not really enough, right?
I was going to ask that.
And
So, because
yeah,
apparently Iran has, they've allowed ships to pass through for
yeah.
Pakistan. So, why are we in a crisis even then?
So it's just 20 ships. That's two ships per day. That's not enough for Pakistan. That's not enough for any state, really. I mean, it's a diplomatic breakthrough, yes, I would say that, but it's not really enough to sustain the economic situation, the energy crisis that Pakistan's facing right now, because most of our oil that we use is imported. So it's not enough, really.
All right. So apparently, from what you read in the news, Donald Trump has said that the war could end in 2 to 3 weeks. This was, I think, one of the recent statements that he made. But Iran says
Hmm.
that, trust is completely zero for Washington.
Yeah.
Pakistan says it will keep pushing for some sort of negotiation and some resolution. So, in
Hmm.
your opinion, what's the most realistic path to a ceasefire, and will it run through Islamabad?
I think the most realistic path would be through diplomacy to begin with. It's plain and simple. You need the parties to the conflict to sit with each other face to face, engage, and Pakistan is right now the only state that has stepped up to provide the platform to the two states. So for us to begin with, it is basically diplomacy. But in all practicality, though, the most plausible, I think, near term practicality, I'm saying near term outcome would be um, for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and for the US to stop with its airstrikes and to really
Because I was going
striking
to say that,
Iran.
why would Iran
Yeah.
open the strait if they're constantly being bombed as well?
So that's, I mean, both countries would have to compromise on that, right? So Iran would reopen the states, the US is to stop the strikes. And with Pakistan engaging China as a guarantor, maybe that is something that Iran would be happy with because, of course, there is a trust deficit between the US and Iran. So having China on board, something that Pakistan um, played very strategically in bringing China on board. So that is something that we can do. I mean, it's all states would have to contribute to it.
Okay, so speaking very frankly, as a Pakistani, uh, I mean, obviously the world is going through a lot right now, but it's also a moment of pride, if I can say that, that Pakistan is playing a very responsible role in global politics currently.
Yeah.
And you
Hmm.
have all these countries, these very powerful countries, that are sort of looking towards Pakistan as providing a solution.
Uh-huh.
Again, given that until very recently, I mean, even now, Pakistan is in constant debt, we owe IMF. Economically speaking, we aren't doing well, there's always something
Mm.
happening. How have we, again, I'm going to ask this question again. How did we get to this point where we now actually can assert some sort of direction towards where global politics is heading? From a country which was constantly in economic crisis, a country which was constantly, if I can use these words, which was constantly being bullied by
Yeah.
other countries over their economic policies. Suddenly, Pakistan is now sitting in the middle and calling truce and sort of laying down guidelines and offering solutions. How did we suddenly become, or how did we suddenly get into the role of Big Brother? I don't understand. If you could provide some clarity here.
So Pakistan's global image for the most part of the 2 decades were shaped by, say, the war on terror and troubled relationship with Afghanistan and with the US and economic crisis and really all sorts of political instability. And Pakistan was a country the world engaged with because it had to, not because it chose to. So the terms of that engagement were usually set in by whichever state was defining the situation. So what the Iran crisis has demonstrated is that Pakistan can set terms itself. Now, again, we have to understand Pakistan's relationship with so Pakistan has played this really smartly. It has established really good terms with Iran and as well as with the US. So Pakistan was the state that went to Washington itself and offered to mediate rather than having the US or any other state request it. It convened major nations in its own capital just last week, and it flew to Beijing and it co-authored a peace initiative with the world's second largest economy, and it negotiated directly with Tehran and extracted a concrete concession, which was the 20 ships that were supposed to pass, that were allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And this was something that President Trump himself highlighted as a diplomatic progress. And Iran's new supreme leader mentioned Pakistan warmly in his Nowruz message as well. So Pakistan slowly, gradually, through engagement with multiple states, has sort of established that position in the region as the only state that has stepped up to mediate. And it really is, it all boils down to Pakistan's diplomacy. It's played it really well. Um, and without really the world suspecting anything, we went from one state to another, and we've now sort of established ourselves as the only state that has the capacity right now to mediate. And Pakistan's offered to host the mediation directly as well, instead of, through indirect messaging. So it all really boils down to Pakistan's diplomacy.
It's impressive to say the least because honestly,
Absolutely.
I would say we've come a long way in a very short time because, like I said, until recently, things were not. They were not as positive as they seem
No.
globally, as far as our diplomacy efforts and all are
Hmm.
concerned.
Hmm.
So again, this is something I think that every Pakistani is probably actually very proud of, that their country is playing a
Absolutely.
positive role for global peace. So, Atiya, recently Pakistan hosted the foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Turkey and Islamabad. And
Hmm.
then our foreign minister also flew to Beijing as well. So, what is Pakistan actually trying to build over here? Are we trying to build a coalition? Are we trying to build a back channel for further diplomacy opportunities? Could you explain that?
This meeting took place on March 29 and in Islamabad, and it brought together foreign ministers of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey alongside our own foreign minister, Mr. Ishaq Dar. And on the sidelines of that meeting, Pakistan's foreign minister reiterated Pakistan's commitment to hosting direct or indirect talks between the US and Iran. So that was a major talking point with all these countries. Now we have to understand that Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Turkey, their importance. We have a Gulf heavyweight with major economic clout. We have the Arab world's most populous state, populous, and a major NATO member with regional military reach. So what Pakistan was doing in Islamabad was building a not an official political coalition, but a coalition of sorts that could give any eventual deal Islamic legitimacy, in that whatever is decided, we can show the world that the Islamic countries, it's backed by Islamic countries, it's backed by the Islamic world, which is important to show the world. And then came Beijing. So our foreign minister's visit to China was widely interpreted by experts as directly linked to Iran's condition for entering talks.
Yeah.
There's a trust deficit between Iran and the US, and Iran would be more willing to engage in mediation, in talks, if we had a guarantor like China.
Like China. Yeah.
This matters, yeah. So this matters enormously because China's specific leverage over Iran. Beijing is by far the largest purchaser of Iranian oil, buying upwards of about 90%, 80 to 90% of Iran's total oil exports. And that gives Beijing both the leverage over Iran and a self-interest to exercise it, because China is also sort of experiencing the brunt of whatever is happening right now with the Strait of Hormuz being shut
The
down.
whole world is at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, and China being the largest buyer of that oil is definitely experiencing it. So if anything, really, there's a lot of self-interest involved in this. as well. So the result of the meeting was a joint 5-point initiative calling for an immediate ceasefire, a halt to attacks on civilian and critical infrastructure, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, the start of peace talks as soon as possible, and the return to, the UN Charter and its primacy. And really, the timing was deliberate. Pakistan positioned Beijing as an important stakeholder and not a distant observer. So, what Pakistan is doing is running the active back channel between the US and Iran while bringing in China as a guarantor for the mediation process so that Iran could feel more comfortable and more confident in engaging in talks with the US. So it's a very, very important move that Pakistan took.
All right. So moving forward, what exactly do you think Pakistan needs to do to retain this role of responsibility, or this, this role of trust which has actually been bestowed upon it by other countries? What is it that we need to continue doing to make sure that we are placed in a position of trust?
Being impartial to begin with. Being impartial, because it's a very sensitive situation. We understand that Iran is our neighbor. If we side more towards one side, maybe the US, that could lead to a trust deficit between us, between Pakistan and Iran, and that's not something we want. But at the
And I
same
think that
time,
would
siding
also
more with
prove to be very problematic for us domestically, because
exactly.
the Pakistani population is not going to take the idea very well
No,
that we are sort of standing in opposition to Iran.
religion plays a very important part in this.
Yeah.
Yes, for sure. So, yeah, so Pakistan really needs to continue engaging with states that have a stake in this matter. Um, it was very smart to start with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and bringing China in, and that's something we need to continue. We need to ensure that this our diplomacy right now is our strength, and we need to continue doing that because there's with Iran and the US, Iran really refusing to sit face to face with the US, there's not really much we can do right now in terms of direct mediation. So indirect mediation is something we need to
But the
continue,
fact that they
and we need to
trust
make.
us enough to actually convey their messages across,
Yeah.
I think that is
Hmm.
also that's a very encouraging.
Absolutely. It is. It is for sure.
All right. Well, this was one of the more encouraging episodes, I think, that we have recorded. Because again, with everything that is going on in the world, Pakistan standing as a beacon of hope as far as
Mhm.
global security is concerned, as far as ending wars is concerned. That is, I believe, always something that should be encouraged. And I couldn't be prouder at this point that my country is actually standing in the forefront and, trying their level best.
And what's really important to understand and to highlight and to sort of find as an encouraging factor is that we're the ones, Pakistan is the one that took the initiative to initiate mediation and peace talks between the two states. We weren't forced into it. So that's also very encouraging, which means we can sort of bring our own terms into this entire process as well. So we played it really well, and again, something we should be proud of for sure.
I think with everything that we have discussed, um, the key note that you take away from this is that we need to remain positive, and we need to keep encouraging this peace initiative that Pakistan is taking, and the fact that Pakistan is playing such a responsible role in all that is happening around the world. And obviously, I think everyone in Pakistan and all over the Muslim world, we're all praying for a quick and peaceful resolution to all that is happening, and for the killings to stop, the bombings to stop. War doesn't really benefit anyone. It's never benefited anyone. But thank you, Atya. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And it was good to, sort of clarify some doubts as well. I sincerely hope that anyone who's watching, they ended up learning something more about the whole topic. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to us at info@sil.edu.pk, and we will try our best to get Athiya to answer all of them because this is her expertise. But
I'd
thank
be
you so much,
more than
Athiya.
happy to do that. You're welcome. It was so nice. to be here and to discuss this really important and consistently changing and progressing matter
Yeah.
here. Yeah,
Inshallah, let's hope that it changes for the better. We only see positive
for
changes
sure.
from here on.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thank you to everyone who's watching. Please take care of yourselves. Allah Hafiz and Pakistan Zindabad.